Welcome to the Decipher podcast. I'm Dennis Fisher. I'm here with Lindsay O'Donnell Welch, and we're going to try and make a little sense of this Sisense breach that was disclosed this week. And Lindsay, I'm not even sure if breach is the right word for this. It's still sort of a little murky as we're recording this on Friday morning, our time. What exactly happened? We know that there was, we started seeing indications yesterday morning, Thursday morning, of something that happened involving this business and data analytics company called Sisense. And we knew it was a security incident. And then, sort of gradually over the course of the day yesterday, some more details came out about some of the data that people think the attackers got access to. And it looks like, from everything I've seen, it looks like somebody got access to a cloud environment um,
Yep.
used by Sisense, but we still don't know any specific information about it, unfortunately, aside from an email that the company sent to customers that was essentially a list of everything that you should change. All these passwords, shared secrets, SSO configurations, all this sort of stuff. But there still isn't any public statement from the company saying this is what happened, or we know that something happened and we're working on it. It's one of the weirder incidents that I can remember in the last few years.
Yeah, it is weird. We also got a public statement from CISA, and that's kind of what, there was
Mhm.
rumblings yesterday morning, but once CISA issued this alert, not really saying anything, like you said, Dennis, but like telling people that, this was something that was discovered by a couple of independent security researchers, and that immediately customers need to like reset their credentials or secrets that were exposed to Sisense services. That's what when people were really starting to say, what's happening here? Obviously, the government's getting involved, the DHS. What's going on? And beyond that, there, like you said, Sisense has issued some customer instructions, but we haven't really seen any public statements beyond that on the time frame, how this happened, most importantly, the impact, what data has been accessed, and um, you know what what to make of all this.
Right. The CISA alert was really interesting to me because it was only a couple sentences, but they don't typically put out that specific kind of alert. They'll put out alerts about a large scale data breach or a vulnerability that's being exploited or things like that. They don't really put out these alerts very often that say, we know about this incident. We are actively responding to it along with other private sector groups. That's all we're telling you for now.
Mhm.
And that was just kind of it. And I know we both looked at it and we're like, what's that? Like,
Yeah.
anything else? What else you have for me? And, I started talking to people in the industry and people in the community that would know about these things. And everybody just sort of like shrugged and put their hands up, said, we know something's bad, but we don't know exactly what yet. It's really odd.
Right. The time frame of all this too. And my
Yeah.
guess is, in part that alert from CISA was trying to get the word out there so that, customers could be aware and they could reset their, credentials and look out for suspicious activity. But that was also kind of what was stated by Sisense. So,
Yeah.
and, when we look at the potential of the data that was potentially accessed, if that was the case, like, Sisense has like a ton of big customers, and like the data that
Yeah.
they're dealing with is like very high level, like very valuable data. So I know they work with like a ton of people like across different industries, and
Yeah.
there's just a lot there that can potentially be exposed. So not good.
One of the, I think, thorniest problems that I noticed and other people sort of pointed out to me was the Sisense platform essentially integrates with all these other third-party applications that
Yeah.
organizations use to collect data and that, do the analytics stuff. So if you look at the list of things that Sisense recommended that their customers change, it's not just passwords associated with the platform itself. It's also shared secrets for other things, passwords for or credentials for anything that Sisense had access to. It's a whole sort of cascading list of things. It's not just a one single point of failure that you need to worry about. it's a whole other sort of spectrum of things that might be a problem inside an organization.
Right, that's a good point. I know like there's a couple of different things there, like Salesforce and some of these other things. So
Hmm.
it's a little worrisome there as well. And I think at the end of the day, what we want to know, but like most importantly, what customers want to know is like who is impacted here? Like
Hmm.
what specific customers, like what specific data, how will this impact their customers, the data of people, they're kind of analyzing. I would say that's like a top priority piece of information that should be kind of shared. I don't know if that's known at this point, but that should be a top priority.
Yeah, my guess is that that's one of the things they're still trying to figure out at this point is exactly the scope, how many customers are potentially impacted, what the scope of that impact inside those organizations is, whether it affects just cloud-based customers or also the on-premise customers. I saw that question for several people in the Sisense community um, message board, I guess, just people asking questions about this. And I didn't see anyone answer several people said, we're an on-prem customer. Are we affected? I didn't see a definitive answer to that. So those are the things I think that, in the next few days, hopefully information will come out for these folks and they'll be able to get their arms around it. But right now, that information is not out there.
I know, yeah. That's something people want to know for
Yeah.
sure. So
And of course, it's always one of these things where it's happening as you're going into a weekend and everyone is just sort of like looking around like, do we have to stay, what are we doing, like, it's Friday, do we have to put people on all over the weekend to get all this stuff done? uh, how are we going to
yeah.
handle this?
And like resetting credentials, like for some company, that's like no small feat at
Oh yeah.
all. Like that's so, it's gonna be a long weekend, I think, for a lot of these customers. And I think that's why some companies also wanted to know, like, am I impacted? Like, am I not? Like, it seems like regardless, you need to go do that. But the other thing too that I forgot to mention is if you like the CISA advisory said, like, if you are using or have previously used to access Sisense services, so like that is like a much wider net, I think, than just like if you are right now a customer. Like if you used to access the services, that's also something that applies to you too.
Yeah, it's it's sort of like if you ever get one of those data breach notifications for, an email address that you had 15 years ago, or like a credit card that
Yeah,
for, Tower Records that's been out of business for 10 years and you're like, okay, whatever. But
yeah.
this could be one of those things where an organization would say, well, we haven't used that product in 5 or 6 or 7 years, but there still could be some weird connection there that, it ends up causing trouble.
Right. Yeah. I think this is going to have a really long tail type of impact of companies trying to figure out if they're impacted and what the implications are there.
One of the other interesting pieces of this to me is when we saw the initial notification from CISA, it said an independent security researcher or researchers had discovered this. And then some of the researchers we know in the community, I don't think the folks who actually discovered it, but people that were helping to analyze it said on Twitter that this had been sort of being worked for several days, possibly more than a week now. And there are a bunch of separate CERT organizations involved, national CERTs, sort of around the world that were involved in this, along with CISA and some other teams. So it seems like a pretty large scale effort to get their arms around this before word leaked out publicly.
Yeah, and I'm trying to think when I think of the timeline of other like really big breaches that we've seen,
Mhm.
that's we haven't really seen that type of like behind the scenes for like a long time. At least I'm sure there have been some, but it seems like that's like maybe it's big enough where they're trying to like involve governments, involve like people who need to be
Yep.
involved before going public with it.
It reminded me, and this is 1,000 years ago now, but it reminded me of the way that the DNS bug that Dan Kaminsky discovered. I can't remember the exact year because it was so long ago,
Mhm.
but that Dan discovered. And then there was this whole behind the scenes coordinated effort to address it before it was disclosed. And that was enough ago that it was easier to do that than it probably is now to prevent things from getting out. It's a lot
Yeah.
more difficult to do that these days than it was in 2008 or 9, whenever that was.
Hmm.
You typically see this more with vulnerabilities, like big, say something in the Linux kernel that's going to affect a wide range of distributions and customers than you do with like a breach, because a lot of times these have to be publicly disclosed. Like you have to send a letter to the California government or some other state government to disclose something if there's customer data affected. So
Right.
stuff gets out like that more quickly, but bugs it's a little easier to keep a lid on sometimes. But yeah, it's a unique situation.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. We'll have to see kind of what happens. And yeah, the notification like requirements for all this are kind of a unique piece too. I don't know
Yeah,
at some point if this company is going to need to come forward with something or um, we'll
probably,
see. Yeah.
probably.
I
Yeah,
haven't even thought of the different like kind of compliance pieces there
yeah.
that would, you know, apply for this specific situation with this company.
Yeah. I guess it would depend if customer data was actually accessed. It's possible that it wasn't. We just don't know at this point. So
Yeah.
it's one of those things we'll see probably over the weekend or early next week when more things come to light. So
Yep. Yep.
all right. Thanks so much, Lindsay. Good to talk to
Awesome.
you.
Thank you. Thanks.